In 1937, the most famous woman in the sky vanished without a trace. Amelia Earhart wasn't just a pilot, she was a global icon. Newspapers followed her every move. Radios announced her name. Millions believed they knew her story, until one flight erased it forever. She was attempting the impossible, to become the first woman to fly around the world. But somewhere over the vast Pacific Ocean, near a speck of land called Howland Island, her voice crackled over the radio, and then went silent. No wreckage, no bodies, no final message. For nearly 90 years, the ocean kept its secret. Some believe she crashed and sank into the deep. Others claim she survived, stranded on a remote island, slowly dying under the sun, her remains dragged away by giant crabs. Official searches failed. Governments gave up. But then, decades later, something surfaced. An aluminum panel, weathered, scarred, marked with strange letters and numbers etched by human hands. Found on a remote island, frighteningly close to where Amelia Earhart disappeared. And it raises one disturbing question. What if she was closer to survival than anyone ever imagined? The Pacific that morning did not look dangerous. It stretched outward in dull silver layers, calm enough to lie. Below the Electra, the ocean reflected the sky so perfectly that horizon and water blurred into a single, depthless surface, as if the world had been erased down to two colors. Amelia watched it through the cockpit glass, aware of how quiet everything had become except for the engines and the constant, irritating hiss of the radio. Fred Noonan was bent over his charts, pencil moving slowly, his confidence worn thin by the hours. Celestial navigation depended on clean signals, on certainty, and certainty was slipping away minute by minute. Clouds drifted where they should not have been. Bearings refused to align. Each correction felt like a guess layered on top of another guess. Amelia pressed the transmit button again. Her voice went out into the void, measured, professional, calm by habit rather than comfort. She reported fuel levels. She reported their position as best she could estimate it. She waited for a reply. Only static answered. The radio, that thin thread tying them to the world, seemed to mock them now. Sometimes a faint voice surfaced, distorted and broken, then vanished. Other times there was nothing at all. The closer they believed they were to Howland Island, the more unreal it felt. A runway the size of a postage stamp in the middle of an ocean that had no edges. Missing it by even a few miles would mean flying forever or until the engines gave up. Amelia adjusted course again. She did not say she was worried. She did not need to. Fred could hear it in the way the engines were being coaxed rather than commanded, in the silence between their exchanges. The Electra pushed on, faithful and fragile at the same time. Hours passed in fragments. The sun climbed, burned, then softened. Fuel gauges dipped lower than either of them liked to admit. Amelia scanned the water relentlessly, searching for anything that did not belong. A wake, a shadow, a change in color. But the Pacific offered no clues. It swallowed distances whole. When the final radio call went out, it carried no panic. Only exhaustion. Only the thin edge of disbelief. They were running low. They were flying north and south along a line that should have intersected land. They could not see it. And then the sound changed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but enough. A vibration that didn't belong. Amelia felt it through the controls, through her hands, through the bones of her arms. She eased the throttle, listening, calculating. The Electra was still flying, but the margin had narrowed to almost nothing. What happened next was never recorded. There was no explosion heard. No confirmed crash. Only silence where a voice had been. Much later, years later, people would imagine the moment in sharp, theatrical strokes. Fire. Screaming metal. A clean plunge into the sea. But the ocean does not work that way. It is patient. It allows mistakes. It offers alternatives that look, for a brief moment, like mercy. Somewhere in that endless blue, a strip of land weighted flat, coral-edged, barely rising above the water. An island so insignificant it barely earned a name on navigation charts. A place where the tide crept in and out like a slow breath, erasing footprints as soon as they were made. If a plane came down there, it would not vanish immediately. It would sit. It would rust. It would be touched by salt and wind and sun. And if someone survived the landing, they would have time. Time to walk the shore. Time to search for shade. Time to realize that rescue was not coming quickly, if at all. Decades later, fragments would begin to surface. A piece of aluminum here. A story there. Bones that did not quite fit any known file. Numbers scratched into metal. Not by accident. Not by nature, but by someone trying to mark existence before it was erased. Not proof. Not certainty. Just enough to disturb the official ending. Enough to suggest that Amelia Earhart's story did not end in the sky, or even in the sea, but somewhere quieter, where survival was possible and hope lasted far longer than anyone wanted to believe. And that possibility refuses to die. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you like this story. The island, if it was an island, would not have revealed itself all at once. It would have appeared slowly, reluctantly, as if unsure whether it wanted to be found. A pale line against the water, a distortion in the horizon, something that did not move the way waves moved. For a pilot trained to read the sky and the earth, that difference would have mattered more than hope itself. If the Electra came down there, it would not have been graceful. The coral reef would have torn at the landing gear, screamed against metal, slowed the aircraft violently, but not fatally. The sound would have been unbearable, metal grinding, glass shuddering, the engines choking as salt water rushed where it was never meant to be. And then, suddenly, nothing but wind and surf. Amelia would have sat there for a moment, hands still on the controls, breathing shallowly, waiting for pain that might not come. Fred, too disoriented, stunned, alive. Survival does not feel heroic in its first seconds. It feels confusing, embarrassingly fragile. The body insists on checking itself piece by piece, as if it cannot believe what the mind already knows. They would have climbed out carefully, shoes sinking into wet coral sand, the air thick and heavy with heat. The smell of the ocean would have been overwhelming. Not the romantic salt of postcards, but something sharper, invasive, everywhere. The Electra, tilted and wounded, would have stood there like an accusation. Proof they had made it. Proof they were nowhere. Daylight would have made the island look manageable at first. Palm trees, scrub, birds that did not fear humans because they had never learned to. The reef stretching outward like a natural barricade. It might have felt almost peaceful in the way isolation can trick the mind during its earliest hours. They would have expected to be found. That expectation changes everything. Amelia would have believed, at least at first, that the radio silence was temporary, that a ship was already altering course, that someone, somewhere, was narrowing the search grid. She had lived her life surrounded by attention, by press, by voices calling her name. Disappearance would have felt unnatural, impossible to maintain. They would have rationed immediately. Water first, shade second, signals third. Every decision would have been deliberate, shaped by discipline rather than panic. Amelia had always been methodical under pressure. Fred, too, understood waiting. Navigators were trained to trust time, even when time betrayed them. But days on an island stretch differently than days in the air. The sun would have risen and fallen with cruel consistency. Tides would have erased evidence of the landing, inch by inch. The Electra would have begun to change color, its skin dulling under salt and heat. Metal does not decay loudly. It surrenders in silence. At night, the island would have become something else entirely. Sounds multiplied. The surf grew closer. The dark pressed in, with no artificial lights to soften it. Stars exploded across the sky, beautiful and indifferent, offering navigation without escape. Amelia would have recognized constellations she had trusted her entire life, now useless overhead. There would have been conversations they never expected to have. Quiet ones, about choices, about small regrets that suddenly felt enormous, about whether history would remember them correctly or at all. Fred might have tried to calculate their odds aloud, then stopped doing it, realizing numbers could no longer protect them. Hope would not vanish quickly. It never does. It erodes. Each passing day, without a plane overhead, would have altered the weight of the air. Each bird call not answered by engines would have settled something heavy in the chest. Amelia would still have walked the shoreline, still searched the horizon, still mark time somehow scratches stone's memory. Humans mark existence when no one else is watching. And somewhere during those days, perhaps when energy was already thinning, someone would have taken a piece of metal and pressed a sharp edge into it. Letters, numbers, not random, not decorative, something meant to be understood later, if later ever came. A quiet message, left behind in case the ocean decided to speak instead of them. The island would have kept its silence, and the world, far away, would have begun to write a different ending. Time on the island did not pass in days anymore. It broke apart into heat, shadow, thirst, and brief moments of relief that felt larger than they were. Morning arrived like a weight pressing down rather than a beginning. The sun climbed quickly, burning away the softness of dawn, turning the coral into a white glare that hurt the eyes. Amelia learned to move early, before the heat took command of her body, before thinking became slow and unreliable. She walked the shoreline every morning, not because she expected rescue immediately, but because routine kept fear from growing teeth. The ocean looked different each day. Sometimes it was flat and deceptively gentle, sometimes restless, its surface fractured by wind. She studied it the way she once studied maps, searching for patterns, signs, anything that suggested the world beyond the horizon still cared they were here. Fred grew quieter as time passed, not withdrawn, just economical with words. His energy was spent calculating tides, watching the sun, trying to understand the island's rhythms as if they were another form of navigation. He mapped the place mentally, noting where the land rose slightly, where the reef was sharpest, where birds gathered at dusk. Knowledge, even useless knowledge, gave him structure. The plane became both shelter and reminder. Its shadow offered brief mercy during the hottest hours, but every glance at its twisted frame carried the same unspoken thought: it would never fly again. The radio remained silent no matter how carefully they tried it. Batteries faded. Static replaced possibility. Amelia still touched the controls sometimes, almost unconsciously, as if muscle memory could resurrect function. Water was the first real enemy. Rain came rarely, and when it did, it vanished quickly, absorbed by sand and heat. They learned to catch it where they could, improvising with fabric, metal, patience. Thirst sharpened everything. Sounds grew louder. Thoughts grew narrower. Small decisions felt enormous. Amelia noticed how easily the mind tried to jump ahead to imagine the end instead of the next hour. She forced herself back, again and again. At night, sleep came unevenly. The ground never softened. Insects made their presence known. The ocean spoke constantly, a low, endless voice that made silence impossible. Sometimes Amelia lay awake listening to it, thinking about how many miles it stretched in every direction, how it connected continents, histories, wars, lives, and how completely it isolated them now. There were moments quiet, dangerous moments when hope felt almost unreasonable, when the sky remained empty too long, when no smoke answered their signals, when the routine of survival began to feel permanent rather than temporary. Amelia did not say this aloud. She had learned long ago that despair grows faster when named. Instead, she did things. She walked. She watched. She marked time, the only way she could by memory, by repetition, by leaving traces that proved they had been here. The markings in the metal were added slowly, carefully. Not a message of panic. Not a plea. Something steadier. Something meant to endure salt and time. Fred noticed the change in her, then not weakness, but focus sharpened by reality. Survival had stopped being about rescue alone. It had become about meaning, about leaving behind something honest if the island refused to let them leave with their bodies. The island itself seemed indifferent. Birds nested. Tides obeyed the moon. The reef cut and healed and cut again. Nature did not rush them. It waited. And far beyond the horizon, ships passed unknowingly. Search patterns shifted. Reports were written. Conclusions began to harden. The world, slowly and without malice, started to move on. But on the island, Amelia Earhart was still very much alive, standing at the edge of the water, watching the light change, listening for engines that might never come, and refusing quietly, stubbornly to let the story close. The end did not arrive suddenly. It never does in places like that. It came the way everything else on the island came slowly, quietly, disguised as another ordinary day. By then, Amelia had learned the exact sound the tide made when it was turning, the subtle difference between wind moving through palms and wind carrying rain that would never quite reach them. Her body had changed. Lighter, leaner, movements deliberate, conserved. Pain had become background noise, something acknowledged and then set aside. Fred's steps had slowed too, his calculations now mostly private, carried out in his head without pencil or paper, as if writing things down would make their situation too real. They still watched the horizon. That habit never left. Even when belief had thinned to almost nothing, instinct remained. The sky was vast and empty, an uninterrupted blue that mocked memory. Amelia thought often about flying, not the danger, not the fame, but the feeling of motion, of purpose, of knowing exactly where she was going. On the island, direction had lost meaning. North and south no longer mattered. Only shade, water, and the passing of light. Fred went first. Not dramatically, not with final words meant for history. He simply stopped waking one morning, his breathing shallow through the night until it wasn't there anymore. Amelia sat with him for a long time, listening for a sound she already knew would not return. She did not cry immediately. Grief, like everything else, had become measured. She buried him as best she could, hands blistered, muscles trembling, the sun indifferent overhead. There were no markers grand enough for what he had been, only stones arranged with care, aligned the way he would have wanted, precise, intentional. When she finished, she stood there silently, aware that the island felt larger now, emptier in a way she had not expected. Alone, time loosened completely. Amelia continued her routines, though no one was watching anymore. She walked the shore. She checked the plane. She added one final set of marks to the aluminum, pressing harder this time, slower, ensuring the lines cut deep. Not for rescue, for truth, for proof that she had not vanished without thought. Her strength faded in increments, so small they were almost polite. One day, she could walk the full length of the reef. Another day, she rested halfway. Eventually, even standing at the water's edge required effort. Still, her mind remained clear. Pain sharpened memory rather than erasing it. She thought of her parents, of George, of crowds applauding moments that now felt unreal. She wondered how the story was being told without her. The island did not answer. On her final morning, the sea was calm, the sky pale. Birds moved as they always had, unconcerned with endings. Amelia sat near the remains of the Electra, her back against its corroded skin, feeling the warmth seep through her clothes. She watched the light change, the way she had watched it from cockpits all over the world. There was no fear left, only a quiet awareness that survival had run its course. When the tide came in, it reached farther than usual, touching the reef, licking at metal, beginning its slow work of erasure. The island accepted what it was given, the way it accepted everything else. Years later, fragments would surface. Bones, aluminum, numbers scratched in a metal that refused to disappear completely. Enough to disturb certainty. Enough to suggest that the end had not been where everyone assumed. But the island kept most of its secrets. And Amelia Earhart, who had crossed oceans and rewritten what was possible, did not disappear into mystery. She endured it. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you like this story.